Apologies, everyone. We're going to start fairly soon. Just waiting on the rabbi to return from the first minyan back since lockdown. So exciting. It just could take a few minutes more. Sorry for the delay.
See me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. We're live.
We're live. Excellent.
We're live. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Sorry about the delay. Hello to Stephen Sharp and hello to Sheila Morris and everyone else that is watching.
Hello,
Rabbi,
everybody.
I guess I should congratulate you, welcome you back. You've just held the first service in, what, 4 months?
Yeah, I think we closed around about the middle of March. I could look up exactly when it was that I uploaded that video. So we closed then, and we've not had any services at the shul. We've had lots and lots of services via Zoom every day, except for Shabbos. We had services via Zoom. To be able to be back, and thank God there were 20 people in shul tonight. So we weren't sure we would get a minyan. We had a very good minyan tonight, and long may it continue. Yeah. Hello from Laura. Michael was just here. It was great seeing Michael in person.
Fantastic.
It was really special.
Everything went smoothly. Everybody followed.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Everything went smoothly. We're very, very happy that we're now able to get that going.
Fantastic.
So Mincha went smoothly, and we hopefully, we have a visions for Kashrus moving on. Sheila says there's no sound. Is everybody else here? Can everybody else hear us? Laura says yes. Okay. Fine. Okay. Sheila, maybe refresh it. We've had that before.
Right, great. Rodney's there as well. Hello, Rodney. Good evening.
Yes, good evening, Rodney. We also wish Chaim Aruchim to Michelle, who was there tonight.
Yeah. So again, on the reopening, just want to say a big thank you to everybody that's been working in that reopening working group. Paul Barrett's been amazing.
Yes.
Wendy, of course, in terms of day-to-day and making sure that everything was delivered and in place. Yourself, Ian, Rachel Snow-Miller, Debbie Verber, Deborah Fraser,
Richard Elton, Gary Hershkovich.
They've all been amazing.
And I think the one person that didn't get any credit, but he should get credit also, is, hi, Stephen. The one person that also should deserve some credit is Stuart Nesbitt, because he's actually the one that provided us all the gear. So everything we have is actually from Stuart Nesbitt. We got floor. We got sort of everything working properly on the floor. We got signs. We got everything else. Stefan, I want to wish you long life as well. You have a yahrzeit for your father tonight, so we wish you Chaim Aruchim.
Wish you long life, Stefan. Right. Let's get into this week's topic.
Okay.
So we've chosen one that has actually come as a bit of a request from members of the congregation, of the audience, and it's to do with Kashrus. There are areas of Kashrus that people are, I think they're beguiled by. They're not quite sure the reasons for the things that we do. A lot of the things that we do are handed down traditions. They're never ever really explained to us. So they seem bizarre and strange. It only really as a Jewish person sometimes becomes that feeling of how strange it is when you have to explain it to somebody that knows nothing about Judaism and your dietary requirements. And we also wanted to touch very briefly on Kashrus as an industry as well, because let's face it, it is major business. I was in the research for tonight. I was looking at what the Kashrus industry is worth to America on an annual basis, and it's somewhere in the region of $15 billion a year on kosher certification, and it's a huge market. And that's just one part of the world. It's a big part of the world.
Yeah.
And in terms of kosher food, it's a big producer and a big consumer. But obviously, it's big money, and that has to play into the debate somewhere. So, Rabbi, I don't know where you want to start from on this subject.
I'll allow you to choose, or if I want, if the audience wants to ask the first question. They're all going to be interesting and difficult questions, so there's no better or worse question.
Okay.
Maybe let's start at the beginning. Let's work with what Modi says. Maybe Rabbi give a bit of an introduction to Kashrus before we start, and then we'll move on to all the other questions that come with it, because there are plenty of questions that come with it. Okay, let's start off. There are two parts in the Torah where the Torah. Why can't one? Okay, we'll come back to that, Robert. It's a good question. There are two parts in the Torah where the Torah actually speaks about Kashrus. There are the issues of the animals that you are allowed to eat. That is one thing. And so we get a whole list of animals that you are allowed to eat. You're allowed to eat any domesticated animal that has split hooves and chews its cud. Those are the animals you're allowed to eat. And we see also in the Torah, even though it doesn't tell you exactly how you're meant to do it, the Torah tells us you will slaughter this animal in a way that I have commanded you. By which lots of the commentators actually point out that there's no command over here exactly how he did it. And the answer is that it proves to you that there's an oral law. There was some form of tradition passed down to Moses where God says to Moses, I want you to slaughter the animal the way I told you exactly what to do. Okay? So we'll come back to your question as well. That's an excellent question. We're going to have to come back to a lot of these questions. I'm going to finish my introduction, and then, David, we're going to have to... There's some really good questions coming in over here, and I think we want to deal with them. We want to deal with all your questions, so please. So that's the first thing that I would say. So you have the animals, then you have the birds that you're allowed to eat. The Torah gives you a list of birds that you're not allowed to eat. All other birds you are allowed to eat. Today it becomes a little bit it becomes a little bit difficult because we don't really have a tradition of what these birds are, and so therefore, unless we have a tradition of what we can eat, we don't really know what we can or cannot eat. So turkey, when they came upon turkey at one, originally when they found it in America, there was a huge discussion. Is this animal kosher? Is this animal not kosher? We never seen this thing before. We don't know if it's one of the things in the Torah or not. In general, nowadays, it's assumed that turkey is kosher. And then we have fish. Anything with fins and scales is kosher. Anything without fins and scales is not kosher. So eel, octopus, mussel, shrimp, all those things, no fins and scale. Sorry, all the shellfish and everything of that's out. That's as far as the animals are concerned. Then we have another set of kosher laws, which is lo sevashel gdiba chalei bimo. You're not allowed to cook a calf in its mother's milk. We have a tradition. The Gemara says that it doesn't mean necessarily a calf. It means any type of meat. And it doesn't mean necessarily its mother's milk, but it means any type of milk. So if you mix meat and milk together, that's also forbidden. And it says in the Torah 3 times. One tells you you're not allowed to cook it that way. You're not allowed to consume it that way. And you're not allowed to derive any benefit from it. Those are the 2 main Kashrus laws that the Torah has. From that spawns a very large amount of other laws. Number 1, the law of waiting between Milky and Meat. Because you might say, well, if I don't eat the meat and the milk together, where's the issue exactly? The Torah says don't cook or don't eat the 2 together. Fine. I had meat and then I had milk. So there's a disagreement, but the Rabbanon said you shouldn't have one after the other because you get confused, etc., etc. We're not gonna allow that. So you have the waiting, and then there's a discussion exactly how long to wait. Beyond that, you'll also have the discussion of, and this is a lot of the halachas of Kashrus go and sort of base themselves around this halacha, what's known as ta'am, which is taste, or blios, which is called things that have been swallowed up. So if I've cooked meaty in a certain kind of a pot, in a pot, there is a taste that remains in that pot, and then if I went ahead and I cooked milky in that same pot, you would have some of that taste redistributed back into your pot, and that will be problematic. Okay, so that's taste. Then we also have a few other halachas. So we keep on. I'm sorry, I'm bombarding with all these things, but I know a lot of them are going to come up. So rather than doing one at a time, let's just do all of them. We also have then later rabbinic enactments of not having bread of non-Jewish people, not having food cooked by non-Jewish people. That means even if you were watching it, means it's 100% kosher. But if it's been cooked by a non-Jew, you shouldn't have it. Also, wine. We'll speak about wine later. So there is yayin nesech, which is known as wine that's actually been poured as a libation for avodah zarah, for idol worship. That has been used for idol worship. That's not allowed to be used. Beyond that, we also have what's known as stam yainam, which is most of our wine today. I don't know how many pagans there are out there. I think in the UK, you'll have a very hard time finding pagans. You'll find atheists, you'll find Hindus, and you'll find the Buddhists, and you have Muslims and Christians and all sorts. But I think neo-paganism is not one of those very popular religions nowadays. So you don't have that, but you have Chazal still said, even so, there was an issue with the wine. A lot of these things, the last three that we mentioned over here, the bread, the cooking, the wine, have to do with marriage, sort of that we're trying to stem into marriage. And so the more you create barriers for relationships, the more complicated it gets. So if I cannot eat at a non-Jewish person's house because of the food that they cooked, even if all the food is kosher, it makes it very complicated for me to marry somebody there, because it's going to be a little bit awkward if I'm going to have to cook all the food, and whenever they cook food, I can't eat it. If I can't go out and have a drink, and let's face it, nowadays, a lot of people meet their spouses at a party, at a bar, in university, when they go to some kind of fraternity thing, whatever it might be. And a lot of the original connections are done over alcohol. Alcohol is a great way for people to connect. People do connect over alcohol. So Chazal said, we don't do that because it creates that connection. That's the extra halachas that we have. Then, as you said, there'll be a lot of questions that will come from that, some of which have been raised by Saul and by Robert already. And, I think we'll say that at the moment as an introductory remark. I know it's a little bit long, I apologize. But let's see if we can then try to answer the specific questions as they come up.
That's fantastic. So I've actually got a question that was sent in before Robert and Saul's, but it would lead us in to addressing Robert and Saul's as well. This was sent in early in the week, actually, by Kate Lurie, we were talking to, and she made a good question or good comment. She says, so many people in the community are now in dire straits and need to access kosher food banks. It has been highlighted to the council that kosher food costs so much more than non-kosher. Could the Beis Din consider offering a charity rate so that producers of kosher food can pass that reduction on to people in need in this unprecedented time? And it's interesting because there is a Zoom call. It might even be the one that Kate was just on, but there is a call that goes between all the different Jewish organizations in Manchester. One of those is I believe it's the L'chaim Food Bank that's run by Dubby, and they're sending out an unprecedented amount of food. Now, this then goes back to some of the things that this working group has achieved. The government, as we know, are sending out food parcels to those that are most vulnerable. And obviously, those food parcels originally turned up without any sort of kosher goods in them or anything like that. So one of the things that this working group did, they got in touch with Parliament, and they made sure that future parcels that were sent out to Jewish and Muslim people met with their dietary requirements, which is fantastic. But cost is the one thing that you hear repeated again and again and again. And if there is a sort of a pet hate of mine, particularly at Pesach time, it's the cost associated with keeping a certain standard that has, let's face it, it's evolved. So the standard of Kashrus, and particularly the Hiddur mitzvah, if you like, of Pesach, has gone crazy recently in the past few years. So it all comes down to money.
Okay, so I think coming back to the question that was asked about kosher meat being expensive, coming back to Kate Lurie's question, I think understanding kosher food production, and I wouldn't say that I'm an expert at kosher food production. I have a bit to do with the Beis Din now. I know what's going on with the shechita quite well. I don't know so much about the kosher production, but I'm sure that I could speak to people in the kosher food production as well to find out. I mean, the one side that I would say is, David, you just said it's a $15 billion industry, so that means somebody is raking in a lot of money somewhere, right? I can't imagine there's a $15 billion industry and there's a whole bunch of rabbis saying, how come we never got any of this?
Well, no, but that's the controversy of this industry. The rabbis set the standard of kashrus that modern households are meant to upkeep if you're Orthodox.
Yeah.
And they're also responsible or involved in the underwriting of the cost of providing that kashrus certification. So there's a lot of money riding on this. and therefore day-to-day decisions that are made by local based in, and also you can see, I mean, years ago we had this, it's probably before your time, but years ago there used to be the great Vimto debate, where Vimto was a drink that was, for years it was kosher. All of a sudden it became non-kosher in Manchester, and in London it was still kosher, or vice versa. There was this disconnect between the two. So let's face it, local based in does have quite a big say on Kashrus, and if money's involved, the more cynical amongst us would ask questions as to, is everything being done in our interest, or is it being done in the interest of keeping the wheels turning?
Okay, so that's a really excellent question. I think it's a really complicated question also to give an answer to. So let me try and work with that. Let's look. Let me start with the MH and then come back to the Beth Din, because I know from the MH and then I know from the Beth Din. The MH provides a whole bunch of services.
It's not Vimto, by the way. It's not Vimto. It's not Vimto.
Okay, I'm glad. Because I would have to stop the broadcast here now if you were drinking Vimto, because I wouldn't want to associate with someone who drinks Vimto.
I can understand.
True, this I don't know. I don't know anything about the Vimto debate. I've not had it, but not because of Kashrus reason. I've just never had this stuff. So you have a community that's providing services. They're providing a mikveh. They're providing a shechita. That means that that people should have meat to have. They're providing hechsherim to different establishments. They have rabbonim. They have a whole infrastructure that they need to run. And yes, there is a tax that's put on the meat for that. So I'm going to talk about meat now, because I know a little bit about meat, because I've been very involved with this in the last however long it is. If you have, let's give an example. I'm not going to give exact figures, so the numbers I'm giving are not 100% correct. But let's just assume they are correct. You're going to an abattoir and you want to buy meat. The abattoir is going to say to you, we will charge you X per kilo of meat that you buy off us. That's the way it's going to be. Now, the problem is that there are parts of the cow that nowadays we're not exactly sure how to use. So we can only use the forequarters as they're known. Not 4 as in the number 4, but 4 as in FORE, the front part of the animal. So when you shecht a cow could weigh in the region of 900 kilos to 1,200 kilos. The amount of meat you're going to get out of there from just using the forequarter with leaving most of it behind, you're going to get about 180 kilos out of that entire cow. Then you need to debone it and get rid of the fat. You're then up to already 120 kilos. On every cow that you shecht, we only keep about 120 kilos of meat. The rest of it either gets sold by them on to another consumer. Yeah, so you sell it on to I'm going to have to read one thing afterwards.
Leave that to afterwards.
Yeah. So
hang on. When you say they, sold by them, it's sold by...
the abattoir needs to get rid of the other half of the meat.
So that doesn't belong to us and we're selling it off.
Pardon?
It doesn't belong to us.
No, it doesn't belong to us. So that's part of it. So we don't have to pay for it, but what makes it, and the abattoirs have a very very positive arrangement with the shchitas, in that the shchita only pay for the meat that they take. They don't have to pay for any of the other meat. Any meat that they shecht and deem to be not kosher or not kosher enough, the abattoir says no problem, we'll sell it. Any meat that they do take, the hindquarters that are not used, the abattoir says no problem, we'll sell it. But that leaves the abattoir with a lot of meat. And therefore the abattoir says, you're not taking, you're shechting on every 30 animals, I know for the Beth Din and probably also for the MH, of every 30 animals that they shecht, they only get 10 animals that they can use. So that's only 1 in 3 that are basically. So the abattoir says, you guys are here for a long time, you're shechting a lot of meat, and we need to get rid of all of your meat. So that's the first thing. That's part of the reason, by the way, why labeling was so dangerous. Because if they were to label our meat as been slaughtered by a ritual slaughterer, many supermarkets, many food chains, many other people would turn around and say, we're not willing to buy this meat because this has been done in a very cruel and unusual way. Whether that's true or not is up for a different discussion. We don't think it's been done cruelly, but they say it's been done very cruel in an unusual way, and therefore we wouldn't be able to sell that meat. If you cannot sell that meat, price of meat, if you think meat is expensive now, meat would go through the roof. You'd have to pay 4 or 5 times the amount of money that you're paying now to be able to afford yourself meat, because you're paying for all that beef that you can't get rid of, which becomes almost impossible. But I mean, we've also created our own little issue in that because the abattoir is willing to get rid of almost every piece of meat that we don't take, we can set the standard not only here, but here or here or here, wherever you want to. Because
can I just to go back on that?
Yeah.
You just said that obviously we set the standards and so on, but you said that we don't shecht the hind quarters of the animal.
We don't use that.
Because we don't. You said the words, we don't know how to do it properly necessarily.
Yes.
But the issue is that you can fly right now to Israel. Well, when you can fly to Israel, you can go there and you can eat the hindquarters of the animal quite comfortably, and it will be kosher. So, are we guilty in the diaspora? This is another question, I hope it's a good question. But are we guilty of effectively dumbing down our shechita, because we are not now teaching new shechtim how they should be shechting the rest of the animal, because we don't do it anymore? And I had heard as well from one source, it may have been in a discussion with Modi, I don't know, sorry Modi if I'm misattributing this to you, but somebody told me that sometimes the way that it works with you, if you get into a if as a based in you don't kasher the hindquarters, eventually that then becomes the received law, and so hindquarters then become treif, and they're not treif now. But if we allow this to carry on for long enough, is it in effect laziness? Is it?
I don't know. I'll tell you what. I think it seems that this is quite recent. It's something that happened probably in the last 70 years. So it was actually the head of the London Beth Din that made this edict. It was Rav Abramsky, who came and who saw that the people that were in charge of getting rid of the fats that you're not allowed to eat in this country were just not adept at doing it. And so he said people are eating treif left, right, and center. And so I'm not sure why we didn't turn around and say, let's just teach everybody the right way of doing it. And we just instead, but that's, it's a long time ago. It's something that, it's too late for me to sort of undo that. So Modi says 1935, actually.
Wow. See that is a long time. And so therefore what in effect, European Jewry is then left with one standard. Israel has an entirely different standard, and again, it may be different in America. So, if you're one of the things that we all struggle with is navigating our way through the world of different hechsherim. Okay. So, here in Manchester, it's fairly straightforward. If you see something that is based in or it's MH, you kind of know that you're in the right zone. Yes. In 2006, 2007, I think it was, we moved to London for a couple of years. And when I arrived there was Sephardi based in, and there was Ashkenazi based in. And if you went and ate by a Sephardi based in certified place, certain friends would say, hey, do you know that it's Sephardi there? You know. And so I called Rabbi Ginsbury at the time, because he was in Hendon, and the first thing he did was invite me around for a meal, so I didn't need to navigate hechsherim. The second thing he said was, look, there is no real difference with where this meat comes from. It's all shechted in the same place. He says much more important to him was get to know the owner of the shop. So when you go in, if you think that this man is going to be respectful of Kashrus law, and he said and he's then also got a tu'udah from a respectable organization, that those should be your guides. But it's not easy, is it? If we've got one standard here and one standard there.
No, it's not easy. But I mean, the issue is, and I think this is probably true. I could just bounce this back at you. Not all estate agents are the same. Right?
That's very true.
Let's go. Some of them will pride themselves in giving top-notch service. Some of them will return your call within an hour or 2 hours of receiving them. Some of them, if you get a call back from them within 48 hours, you're lucky, right? So we say, but they're all estate agents. What difference does it make? Yeah, we're all estate agents, but you can't Not every, in the same way, you can't lump everybody together. There's two issues over here. Number one, there are certain Kashrus authorities that are stricter than others. And if you want to be stricter with the halacha, there are certain things you can be lenient on. You want to be stricter, you can do. So we all know that there's stringencies. Look around now we just opened up shul tonight. We were a lot stricter here than they were in Holy Law. But Holy Law was still much stricter than they were down in MH or in Satmar. Right? There are just different ways that people are going to do it. So different people will take a different stance on it. In the same way with halacha, there are certain things that are stricter or certain things that are not as strict. We'll come back to that maybe when we get to the conversation about the Twix. Right? Twix and Mars bars is another one that everybody gets very into it. However, so that's number one. Number two, which is just as important, I've seen certain kashrus that's been run by some very, very important rabbis, but it's not only a question of are you knowledgeable, but it's also a question, are your systems and are your operations actually up to scratch? Because if you're a huge Talmid Chacham, but your system is rubbish, then chances are you're just going to end up with a rubbish product, even though you know a lot. You might know some very knowledgeable people in property that just don't know how to organize themselves and therefore constantly losing money, even though you'd expect them to make money. And the same is true with Kashrus. So Kashrus it's very multifaceted in that, yes, you're right. If you have a Bezdin, if you have a reputable Bezdin that knows what they're doing and that has a good standard, then you should be able to work with that. Every Bezdin is going to be making money for themselves. The Manchester Bezdin also, we spoke about the MH, but I was going to say about the Manchester Bezdin. The Manchester Bezdin at the moment only has one dayan. We're trying to rebuild it. The Shlita slowly is coming up. If we get together some of the contracts that we want to get together, we might be making enough money to be able to afford another dayan. At the moment, they cannot afford another dayan. And that's part of the issue, that this is a communal organization that needs communal resources to be able to run, but doesn't have enough money to be able to do it.
So that's interesting. Let's look at the money. Let's chase the money, if you like.
Okay.
Modi has made a comment here. Now, Modi obviously knows a little bit about the Basin. I think he was previously a trustee there. The money that is made in Kashrus is from kosher certification of mass-produced items. Ironically, the cheapest kosher foods make the most money for Kashrus organizations. Kosher meat does not bring in substantial funds for a kosher supervisor. The money that comes in from multinationals should be able to subsidize communal infrastructure and even bring meat prices down. That was always a controversial debate when the Basin went through its recent transition.
Yeah.
In terms of
what I would say to that is it's all about I agree with Modi that if you work with multinationals you can make a lot of money. On the other hand, I don't agree with Modi that you cannot make a serious amount of money. We had we had an offer on the table that in the end we couldn't take because we couldn't come up with a way. But that offer would have meant that the Bezdin could have made somewhere in the region of almost £150,000 a year on the Shlita. Right? I don't think that's small change. So you say, well, chase the multinationals. You might make even more money there. Maybe not. But I don't think that the money to be made in Shlita can be sneezed away. Can you can't say that the amounts of money can be quite significant, especially as in Europe there are different people that see Manchester as a place that upholds very high standards of kashrus, and therefore there are people in France, in Germany, in Switzerland, and in Spain, and in other places in Europe that are willing to buy meat that has been shechted here in Manchester, be it through the MH or be it through the Bezdin. And therefore, well, okay, I don't care for export. You make money on export as well. It doesn't really make a difference, money, does it? Money is money, right? Whether it stays here, whether it goes somewhere else. Now, if we made enough money, maybe yes, we could bring down the prices of the meat also. The amount that we make at the moment on the money that is now being charged, and Muddy would know this, okay, that the amount of money that is being brought in from, per kilo is not a huge amount. It's something like, I don't know, a bit over 50 pence, 50, 60 pence per kilo of kosher meat. That's not a lot of money. The meat that's being sold on to the butchers at the price that the abattoir charges you for it, plus whatever kashrus fee it is. if the Kashrus fee was any lower, the Beit Din would be losing money. We still have to pay for 2 shochtim. We still have to pay for somebody who's in charge of labeling the meat. We have to get somebody to salt the meat. There's a lot of processes that are involved in this. There are 3-4 people that need to work on this and whose salaries need to be paid from the money that's coming in on that as well. So you can't just say, oh, well, where does the money go? The money goes to pay for the people that do it.
I think you're right. The only bit that I will remain skeptical on, and I don't think you'll ever be able to convince me otherwise, is that you say obviously if we do enough, the price will start to come down. We have an unusual phenomena here in Manchester, and you can see this if you ever eat out at a kosher takeaway or go into a kosher shop. Normally, competition drives prices down. So people try and cut prices in order to sort of stay in front of the right audience. But in kosher food, that doesn't seem to be the case necessarily. There are some places that have done very well by being cheaper, but in general, it's much higher per unit, if you like, per unit price than you would pay anywhere else, but significantly so.
Oh, very much so.
We're not
I sometimes get these things through the door, and it's like £3 for 3 pizzas and 2 burgers, and I'm like, my goodness, whether it be like £50 when you went to,
But this is a big thing. So it goes back to the debate that we were having the other week. Somebody commented that the cost of being from and Jewish these days is in some cases prohibitive. So let's look at some of the other comments, because it will lead us.
I would say one thing about that before we get to that other comment, and that is there is a big difference between food made at home and eating out. Right? Lots of people enjoy eating out. Eating out has always been, it's a luxury. It's in America, it's become almost a necessity. America has a very different way of doing things. But here, when I used to look in JS, it wasn't packed. You go to London, you'll see 10 times as many people queuing up for kosher restaurants. JS, he's had to close it. His overheads are so big, he's had to close it. He's moving to a much smaller place because he just can't manage the the overheads that are going on over there. Right?
Yeah, well,
I don't even want to discuss that with you.
Well, again, it's a highly political argument, that, and we're not going to discuss people's abilities to run a successful business here. But the truth is that, yes, I think at the core of your comment, the bit that I do agree with is that traditionally speaking, you will find that kosher restaurants here in Manchester are not as well attended in general as their peers in London. There's a million reasons for that. But also, someone could argue that the standard and the quality of the food produced in London and the offering there is more current. It's more in line with what people are looking for, and they have a bigger sort of eating out trend. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Nathan, on the same theme, this Pesach, due to COVID, we're allowed to eat food without the Pesach stamp approval, which was cheaper. Why can't this continue? So obviously, this was done as a super rabbinic dispensation at a time where people were going to be at risk from going out, and there was a run at some point on the kosher shops as well, and you couldn't find the items that you needed. So obviously we found a way to relax things and to allow people to buy these goods. Why can't we look at being a little bit more lenient going forward?
I think chances are that once the dam is broken, in a lot of cases, the dam breaks and that you can't get the genie back in the bottle again as much as you tried. So my guess would be, I don't know what the items are, whether it was sugar, whether it was water, whatever. I don't remember. I mean, it couldn't have been. It wasn't a lot of different items, and a lot of people have been buying sugar without a hechsher for Pesach for a long time already. They say, what difference is it this Tate and Lyle or that Tate and Lyle? They're all Tate and Lyle. Could very well be.
There is a line, isn't there, that you have to draw. So where do you draw your line in terms of ridiculous Pesach goods? So, for instance, water. How can water become not kosher for Pesach? So
water is a very interesting one. So sparkling, it's more the sparkling water, and it depends how it's done. Any water bottle that source is kosher for Pesach. And so if you look at the London Beit Din list, you will find many, many waters without a hechsher. Sainsbury's water, Tesco water, Buxton, Highland, Spring, all these different waters you find are all kosher for Pesach, and you can buy them without an issue. The sparkling water, the question is, where do they get the carbon dioxide from? I'm only at one metaphor. I'm not even sure what I said. Okay.
Well, you know what? With the sparkling water, I was told by a local restaurant owner today that there is a doubt as to where that gas comes from, but
Yes.
they say that sometimes they use recycled gas that comes off production of beer.
That's correct. That's what I was going to get to.
Right.
So therefore, that would make it chomic. That would be a problem of chometz benefiting from chometz, so that's the issue. Which is why carbonated water you would need to get with a hechsher, whereas bottled water, no issue. Kate is saying it's 100% pure items, cocoa, sugar, things like that. You know, there are a lot of people that for years have already done that. I would venture to say that A, if you want to continue doing that, that's fine. But B, that's not where the money on Pesach lies. The money of Pesach, I don't know. I think every year it surprises me when my wife makes me a list and she goes, and that's the whole list. And I always say, please don't say that, because it irks me going back to the shop and spending another £150. It just gets to me once we have to do that again.
But that's the point. You can't go into a Pesach shop without spending £150.
It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And if you look at how your grandparents would have made Pesach and my grandparents' parents would have made Pesach, it's a different world. There were certain things that they just couldn't get hold of. There were certain times where we look at kosher milk, for instance, which is yet another discussion that we can have. The kosher milk industry is relatively young. Other than Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, who was a milkman, each shtetl obviously had their milkman, and that's fine when we were all sort of farmers. But in general, non-kosher milk was being used by Jewish households for years.
No, that's probably not correct, because you're not allowed to use non-kosher milk. It's actually different. There's only very recently, it's the other way around. The halacha says that milk that has been produced, that has been milked by a milkman for a Jewish person without a Jewish person supervising it and making sure that it is cow's milk, is not allowed to be drunk. So we didn't discuss that as one of the things. However, what has happened in recent years, and this is where the changes come and where the confusion comes, Rav Moshe Feinstein has said something. It says something very, very. It's groundbreaking, actually, in this instance. And the question is why people don't use it, or some people will use it, some people won't use it, and how far you can go with this. But his basic premise was that in the same way, if you were to, he created this idea of, because until then there was what's called chalav Yisrael, milk that had been supervised by a Jewish person. It doesn't need to be milked by a Jewish person, so long as a Jewish person supervises it. But you also have what's called chalav akum, which is milk that was milked by a non-Jew. Then Rav Moshe Feinstein came along and said, because, well, he said it in America was the FDA, but the Food Standards Agency over here would come in and would find them mixing any other milk other than cow's milk into this milk, they would get a hefty fine, etc., etc. That would mean, or it creates a certain amount of fear within the people that are milking this milk, and therefore they would never mix anything wrong into it. And therefore, he said you're allowed to use milk that has been milked by a company because they wouldn't mix anything else in, right?
And that's what a lot of people say about modern food standards in general. That
so the problem is, remember the horse meat in Tesco.
I do remember the horse meat in Tesco.
Yeah, so that the issue now, neither of us had any of it, but the problem is that, and that's where a good Kashrus authority would turn and say, we still want somebody looking after that food because there's always someone out to make a buck. And if I can put in horse meat instead of beef and get away with something and make a lot of money on using the wrong kind of meat, then that's what I'm going to do. But if the people are not on my back, I could get away with it for 10 years.
But with milk, it's slightly different, isn't it? Because generally speaking, milk is only really coming from cows. The majority
maybe goats as well, but again, goats
but even goats are okay. But the incidences of pig milk and everything else, it just simply is. It's a myth. It doesn't happen. Let's have a look at some more of the comments. How much of the standards? Sorry, I'll put this one up on the screen. How much of the standards that are kept by kosher food authorities are totally necessary for us to be keeping what God had in mind when He said, "Don't eat milk and meat"? and only eat these animals, and how much of it is either more stringent than necessary or just a moneymaker. We are fond of being over machmir sometimes when it comes to things. We never dilute things. We always make it more stringent.
Okay, so I think when it comes to kashrus and when it comes in general to kosher, I think the more educated you are as a kosher consumer, the more you can understand what it costs, why it costs, what is or what isn't. There are certain people that say if a rabbi, no matter who he might be, says this is okay, then this is okay. Then it must be kosher. Now, what I would say to that is, and that will answer the comment that ST said, just as horse meat was found in Tesco, there have been trade meat found under kosher certifications. That's absolutely correct. And there is a problem over there. And it means that, that's part of the reason why people will want to rely on the more stringent hechsherim, because the more stringent they are, the more quality control there will be. The more there's going to be somebody on top of it, the less of a chance or a possibility there is for something to go wrong. Can something still go wrong? Well, absolutely. But, some people say, to me, this is really important. So the fact that, if I were to ask you, advice on taxation, and you Googled it, and you said, I found something on Google, and on Google it said that I don't have to pay tax in this instance, and so therefore that's good enough, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run my entire tax life and my entire business based on an article that I found on Google, you tell me that's very foolhardy. Pick up the phone to your accountant and find out whether this is or isn't legal. Because you might be following somebody who's a bit of a quack, and then when the HMRC comes after you, you say, well, I Googled it, you're not going to get very far with that one.
Somebody came over in a cold sweat there. Please don't mention the HMRC.
I'm sorry.
Yeah?
Yeah. But, but the same is true, and therefore, right, the same is true. We'll come back to that in a minute, Stefan. The same is true as well when it comes to kosher food. Some people say a rabbi has signed his name to it. If there's anything wrong, he'll burn in hell for it. Right? It has nothing to do with me. I bought it because I had a hechsher. Others will say ignorance isn't bliss. And it's good to know which rabbi has which standard. And again, if you feel certain things are OTT, and there will be things that are OTT, fine, don't buy them, no issue. Right? But you can't say because somebody gives a hechsher, therefore it must be kosher. Because you don't say that in any other, you wouldn't say that in any other, discipline in your life either.
It's easy to say, don't buy that, that's fine. But we've all got that one friend that comes to the house and says, oh, can I just go and get a glass of water from the kitchen or whatever? And when they're in the kitchen, they're going through your ingredients, and they're having a rifle through the fridge, and they're checking personally what you do keep, what you don't keep. We live in a society where everybody is judged, and we like to have a common standard. It's hard to keep that common standard. We all have areas where we're more stringent and more lenient, and so there is a type of social pressure involved with keeping up with the Cohenses.
Yeah, I'm sure there is, but there's a social pressure involved in almost anything, and so that's for you to decide whether you're willing to go along with it or not. So if you have friends that I spoke to somebody who was very well off, and I spoke to him, and we were talking about, renovations. And he said, oh, I just had to do this, and this, into my house. I said, why? I mean, your house looks pretty nice. I don't see. He says, yeah, but you don't live in my social group. In my social group, their houses, the kitchen's not been redone in 5 or 7 years, then you're out of date. You need to redo it. Your kitchen is 15 years old, and nobody's going to say boo to you because that's your peer group. So yes, every peer group will have a pressure. And for some peer groups, the pressure is going to be kosher. Now, I'm not saying that it's right, but to turn around and to say that the only place where we have peer pressure is kosher, and therefore say that everybody's wrong, is just ignoring the fact that life is full of peer pressure. That doesn't make it right, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to give in to that peer pressure or not. I mean, we had that discussion about Broughton Jewish and King David when you spoke about it a few weeks ago. When you said when you switched over, and some people said we were trying to give you peer pressure and to say nobody's going to invite you anymore for Shabbos because your kids are in King David. Now, I don't believe that to be true, and I think probably you've seen that not to be true. But
I've done it. I've not been invited out for Shabbos for the past 4 months. Can you account for that?
No, I can't, but I could blame Boris Johnson if you wanted to.
Let's have a look at some other comments. Stefan Perlman, is it permissible to eat treif in order to stay alive from a medical point of view?
The answer is absolutely yes.
Absolutely.
If there is no, that means if there is a kosher alternative, you have to have the kosher alternative. If there is no kosher alternative for life-saving things, absolutely yes, you're allowed to eat something that's not kosher to keep
Fantastic. Okay. Good evening, Father. How are you doing? Jonathan Mintz, isn't a lot of the meat which we don't use sold to the Muslim community? So that they hold by our standards of shechita, we don't necessarily hold by theirs. So for halal food, that is it's okay, isn't
so it depends. Look, it all depends. I think it's not necessarily that it's being sold to the Muslim community. I know one of the butchers that I spoke to has extensive networks with the Muslim community, and they do buy a lot of the meat off of him, and he does very well on selling it onto the Muslim community as well. All the bits of meat that we don't take, he still takes and sells on the Muslim community, and he's still making some kind of money on it. He's not really a butcher here. He's a meat salesperson. But he tries to arrange shchitas, but he also takes the meat that's not been sold and sells it on to his Muslim friends at a profit, and good for him. You know what? It's a business like any other business. Meat is very, very big business. I would guess that most abattoirs, they'll offset the meat to whoever they can. If they have Muslim customers who are willing to take it, great. If they, they might be able to make an extra bit of money on it. If they don't have Muslim customers that are willing to take it, and they have some other food chains or whoever else is going to take it, they'll sell it, whoever's going to pay the price.
Okay, fantastic. Right, Esty Brooke has asked another question, and just for context and to remain completely on the level here, Esty's husband works for a well-known local Jewish caterer, so very much involved in food production. Her father's a sheikhet by profession as well. So this is a great question. Another question. The way kosher chickens are kept surely cannot be kosher. If the basis of kosher shechita is for it to be as humane as possible, the way that chickens are kept during their life cannot by any stretch of the imagination be kosher. We have tried to find kosher free-range chicken in the past and got nowhere. Who is deciding that this is okay?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. The answer to that question is kosher is decided by how the animal is killed or not killed. Does that make it okay how the animal is kept beforehand? No, it doesn't make it okay how the animal is kept beforehand. And there was no discussion about this beforehand because in the olden days, there were no battery farms. Everybody, you had a chicken, and when you were ready to have chicken soup, you took your chicken to the shochet, to the local shochet in the town, and he killed it for you, and you took it back home, and you had to pull all the feathers off yourself, and you have to slice it open yourself, and everything like that. We've created an industry that is a multi-billion-dollar industry, a multi-billion-pound industry of the meat industry. And the meat industry, like all other industries, are looking to make money. So the way you make money is not by having free-range chickens, because you have free-range chickens, you can only keep 1,000 chickens in this area. And if you have battery chickens, you could probably keep 100,000 chickens in the same area. Now, is that humane? Absolutely not. Is it right? Absolutely not. Does it make them not kosher? No, because that's not the criteria of kosher, not kosher. The criteria of kosher, not kosher is, have they been killed in a humane way? We cannot say because the chicken has been treated badly before it was killed, that makes it not kosher. It doesn't make it right, but it won't make it unkosher.
But it is a basic, it's a basic Jewish concept that we're not meant to treat animals cruelly anyway. So
correct.
Maybe somebody will take notice of that and improve that situation at some point.
I don't know if they will, because the issue is, and I've heard of this, is the amount of the way that chickens are treated is just appalling, really, really bad. So therefore, what I've heard is that sometimes the chickens are in certain batteries where they're shaken off so that they can't fall asleep, because when they're sleeping they don't grow, and when they shake them, they make sure that they grow all the time. Again, horrible, awful. I remember one of the things that I always remember as a child, and one of these things that were a very traumatic experience for me as a child, is we went for kaparos. When they take the chicken and they put it over your head. And I remember we went into this room, and it was full of batteries of chicken, and there was a whole bunch of ladies pulling feathers off a chicken, and the noise was awful, and the stench was awful, and
There's no other smell like it.
But it freaked me out, absolutely. And I remember my father went to get the chicken, and just as he turned around, I couldn't take it anymore, and I ran out the room. And he went running down the street in Vienna with a chicken over his head. Get back here, David! By the time he finally got up to me, we never did kaparas on chickens after that until I left the house.
Okay, Rodney. Good evening, Rodney. Rather than an extra Diane, let's have someone who can trade with the meat. That will bring the money in. So Rodney, again, sort of, that's the opinion that we should be cashering more of this meat. We shouldn't be letting it go to waste.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to waste. It's just not being sold to Jewish people. I think it's important to mention that it's not food that's being wasted. Why it is the way it is, I don't know. But that seems to be the edict, and nobody seems to be willing to undo it. So I hear what you're saying, Rodney. My hands are tied on this one. There's not much I can do about it.
Mr. Eric Rusendahl asks a really good question. Good evening, Eric. How you're doing? How do rabbis keep up with the latest techniques and technologies surrounding Kashrus? I mean, things like meat supplements, using flavorings, etc.
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. And again, the difference between a good Kashrus authority and a mediocre or bad Kashrus authority is how they keep on top of the modern science and what's going on. Meat is evolving. Not that the food, that meat itself is evolving, but what they give to the animals, the hormones, the supplements, what flavorings, what they, whether they inject them before the shechita, what all they do, these things, these animals, these all can have a relevant, point in halacha that will make a difference. And a good kashrus authority should keep on top of what's going on. It's like CPD. In the same way in any other business, if you don't keep on top of what's going on in your field, you might give good tax advice for 5 years ago. You might have good ideas of where to buy properties for 5 years ago, but that was 5 years ago. That's not for today. The same is true in the kashrus department as well. And if you have a Beth-Din that doesn't keep on top of things, that doesn't keep on top of modern technology, doesn't keep on top of advances, and et cetera, so then they're not a good kashrus organization. End of story.
Right, on to a subject and a topic that is going to be more difficult to get out of than it is to get into it. Good evening, Simon K. How are you doing?
Hi, Simon.
That is an uncanny resemblance of Simon, but it's not Simon himself. I am particularly keen to understand the position number one, vegan products, and number two, vegan restaurants. I fully expect the issues for 1 and 2 are different. My brother was vegan for a while, and both he and my parents commented that surely there couldn't be anything wrong with vegan products. This is a very interesting topic because right now I would say, as a consumer public, we are living in the golden era of vegan products. If you go down to a supermarket, the vegan aisle is absolutely stocked. It's very, very, very fashionable at the moment. It's an industry itself that is worth, in terms of their certification, it's worth millions annually.
It's worth much more than the kosher one in America. It's a huge business.
It's a massive market. But I think the precepts of veganism is that they're not using any animal products whatsoever. And
or any derivatives, anything.
Correct. So if they're that strict, and if we are to trust them, why isn't vegan food kosher?
Okay, so let's use point number 2 that you said before is the point to be very careful about. Number 1, if we are to trust them. In halacha, there's a question of whether or not you can trust someone that's just, in it for creating their own product. And in the same way, you cannot trust a Jew, you cannot trust a non-Jew. This goes across the board. This is not we saying we don't trust non-Jews. The halacha says anybody who's creating something for it to be sold has no trustworthiness because money tugs at people. That's just the way it is. And you'll say, well, it's only 1 in 5 or 1 in 10, so it's 1 in 10, but money tugs at people. And that's why you might say, I'm a frum guy who's got a frum restaurant. Why can't I sell something without having a hechsher? The answer is because who says that you're not going to put in the wrong items just because you're going to save yourself 5 pounds, 10 pounds on every kilo of meat? You say, but I won't do that. I'm frum. Yeah, but money's money. We've seen lots and lots of frum people do lots of horrible things for money. So therefore, just because you're religious doesn't mean anything. This same applies to non-Jews. right? It's not, and that's what I'm saying. It's not even discriminatory against non-Jewish people. If you're selling a product, you stand to make money on it. If you can find, now I would venture to guess that vegan food, maybe because it's a bigger industry, it's a little bit cheaper, but it is probably more expensive to eat vegan to come up with all these different kinds of supplements than it is just to eat.
Yeah.
Pardon?
It's meat substitutes. They've got various different
things all these
that
things,
resemble
the soy
meat.
things and whatever else it is. It's not easy to make those. I'm sure there's, and my guess would be definitely in the non-Jewish industries where it's very cheap. You could probably buy a whole chicken in Asda or in Lidl or something, and in a cheaper place, you can Aldi, you might be able to buy a whole chicken for £2 or £3.
Yeah.
I doubt that vegan food can be as cheap as that either, right? Because they're using all this complicated vegetarian stuff.
So at its core, you're saying at its core, we're talking about trust, aren't we?
Yes.
We're talking about trust, and we're saying that
that's one of the things. We're going to come to others, but at the core, yes, we're talking about trust. And therefore, if I don't have somebody looking after the product, then there is no trust. But this is a trust that I don't afford Jews, and it's a trust that I don't afford non-Jews. So if I come to your house, David, if you invited me to eat at your house, I can trust you because you're not selling me the food. There's no trust issue over there. The point is that I'm going to, you've invited me for Shabbos. Okay, I don't eat by anyone in shul as to not embarrass or not insult.
No, I didn't invite you. You just invited yourself.
I know, but I'm very good that way that I invite myself. You know what I mean? I've invited myself to much worse places than you as well. So. But if I invite myself to, if I got invited to someone's house, if somebody's serving me food, they have no monetary gain or interest within it to serve me trade for food. It's their food, then I'm allowed to trust them. As soon as they start selling that food, as soon as money is involved, everybody loses any trustworthiness across the board. That's number one. Number two is the issue, and we spoke about this before, of cross-contamination. I actually read a very interesting article. I kept it on my Google Keep. Maybe I'll put the link in afterwards. I'll put it in a comment. But I found it very interesting. There was somebody wrote the following: "My vegan kids are driving me crazy." And I felt when I read that, there was almost like reading about the Baal Tshuva kid that comes home to his parents that don't really eat kosher, and he's driving them absolutely bonkers and mad with all their chumras. And these vegan kids were saying to their parents, you need another oven. We are not willing to have our vegan food cooked in the same oven that you made chicken in half an hour ago. We're not willing to do that. And it was very fun. We're not willing to use your plates. And it was very funny to read that because I thought to myself, well, finally the non-Jews have caught up to something that the Jewish people are struggling with. So it was that kind of thing. You don't know that I don't know that all vegan foods are made in a vegan environment. Okay, that could be that a vegan company will come in and say this machine has been used yesterday for making pork sausages. Today we will use it for making our vegan falafel balls, whatever it is. So then we say, well, okay, did you put it through an industrial clean? Did you kasher the machine from the pork sausages or not? So I don't know that there is such a halacha, so to speak, in veganism. So you have an issue there. You have an issue of what we spoke about before, which is bishul akum. Food cooked by non-Jews you're not allowed to partake from food cooked by non-Jews. Most of the vegan foods will have been cooked by non-Jewish people, so you'll have an issue over there.
So sorry to caveat that you are allowed to eat food that's been cooked by non-Jewish people as long as it's supervised. That's what you're saying.
It's more than that. You'd need to supervise it, and you'd need to the Jewish person would need to turn on the fire slightly as well.
Okay.
In order to get around that. Yeah, but if you want to have a vegan product and you want to have it supervised, that's fine. But a supervised vegan product is back to the same thing. That's like a kosher product.
Okay, but
going on the vegan route was to say, I'll have something vegan, therefore I don't need a hechsher.
But bishul akum is one of those things that over the years got added as a chumrah, to try and make sure that people don't intermarry or mix, because the idea was I think the story's always given that if you're traveling, you'll stop at a tavern somewhere and you'll suddenly be sharing a glass of wine and a piece of bread with the owner, and then next minute, you're walking down the aisle with his daughter. But in the real world, that, by the way, that almost never happens to me. You'd be
Right.
surprised to know. But in the real world, on a day-to-day basis, that's no longer as big a threat. The other,
I wouldn't say that. Assimilation in this country is at 50 to 65%. I think we have
maybe, but those aren't the only sort of areas of social interaction that we've got. So the reason why it was truly dangerous is because that's where Jews and non-Jews would come to mix, whereas they were more segregated in those days.
I would venture to say that if a lot of the people that are marrying non-Jews were keeping kosher properly, they probably wouldn't marry their non-Jewish spouse because they couldn't. Yeah, I can't be married to someone whose food I cannot eat. That just doesn't work, right? Whoever you might be. And so therefore, because people have dropped out of Kashrus, you say, well, it's become irrelevant. It's not become irrelevant. If people kept the rules and the laws of kosher, my guess would be that we'd have a lot less people intermarrying because the barrier of entrance has been created in a way that makes it very, very difficult for them to mingle, socialize, and get married together.
So let's say I let you have that point. What about the point of avodah zarah? So when it comes to wine, and it also comes into it was mentioned in the Gemara that deals with the discussion on cheese as well. It comes down to avodah zarah that it may be used for idol worship, and therefore, particularly with wine, that's one of the things that could happen. Idol worship, as we know it today, takes very different forms, and you'd be lucky to find worship in general, amongst more sort of atheist communities. But if you've got faith communities, they tend to sort of have, so the Muslims have their own halal certification of their foods. But in terms of idol worship, that's not really something that exists anymore in the same way that it did all those many thousands of years ago.
So we've moved away. We've moved away from what's known as yayin nesech. What you were discussing was known as yayin nesech. Yayin nesech means wine that has been poured out for idol worship, and that was avodah zarah, and that was forbidden. We've moved away from that already in the early 1300s. So when I looked it up today in one of the Sfarim, the earlier Rishonim, Rashi's grandchildren already said, we don't have any idol worshippers around. Rashi lived in a Christian world. And Rambam lived in a Muslim world. They didn't live in a pagan world anymore. There were very, very few pagans in their days.
Yeah.
They lived generally in a monotheistic world, and where they turned around and they said, listen, there is no such thing as yayin nesach anymore. Let's be honest about it. Let's call a spade a spade. You cannot. When's the last time you met somebody worshiping idols? And yet we still said you could not. There was the other there. So that was where we moved from yayin nesach to what's known as stam yainam, wine that has been created by non-Jews without anybody having overseen it. And that was forbidden again because of the the social interaction that it creates between Jews and non-Jews. But we have moved away from the idol worship.
So just to come back to the vegan products and the vegan restaurants, essentially the fact that we cannot trust that the same standards have been upheld mean that at its core, that's what brings the vegan argument down.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Right. Let's have a look at the other comments. We're going to try and get through as many of these as possible. We've got quite a few to get through, Rabbi. Why can't we put some of the Beis Din's profits back into supporting people struggling to keep kosher or accessing food banks like 10% of the Beis Din's parnasa? I don't know if you've seen the Beis Din's accounts, but I'm not sure there's necessarily 10% lying around going to waste. But it would be, in general, their accounts aside and the money involved, it would be lovely to put something back into providing basic goods for people on an affordable basis.
Right. So, I would love to be able to do that. I think Diane Steiner has often spoken about making meat affordable, making everything affordable. I'd love to be able to say that some of the money from the Beis Din should go back into the community. I think the Beis Din is a communal organization that's trying its hardest to give to the community for the Eruv, for Gittin, for Dinei Torah, for Kashrus certification, for a mikveh, for having a dayan, for having a shchita. It's got a lot of things that it does. So it is giving to the community. If there was extra money in there to be able to maybe give to the community, I'd love to be able to say, yes, we'd like to give to the community, and maybe we can bring the prices down on our shchita fee so that the price is cheaper for everybody else. At the moment, it's not running at a surplus, and we're running with too little staff for it at the moment, and therefore, it's not possible. But I wish, Kate, I wish you were right, and I wish we had enough money to be able to do that. And yes, to be able to bring down the money in Kashrus and to be able to make it more efficient and to be able to put some of that money back to the community. Absolutely.
Laura Greenberg, I am not keen on the food at Manchester Kosher restaurants. I would rather eat at home. That is fair enough, Laura. B'tei avon. John Baptiste Mika, bonjour. Accidentally stumbled across the broadcast.
So nice to have you from France.
Welcome. Right, let's have a look here. Laura Greenberg, yes, a non-kosher wine and cheese were used for years. There were never these things supervised in the 50s. There were a lot of things. In fact, Rashi, I think, there is a discussion somewhere about whether or not cheese that doesn't have meat in it, that where the ingredients have come from, that has been made by a non-Jewish person,
yes,
whether or not that is allowed. At some point, there's this question in the Gemara as to where the origin of us not using non-kosher cheeses come from.
There is that question.
And there's a total, and it's not very clear as to what the answer is. I think in the end, I think if I'm not mistaken, they settle on the Avodah Zarah angle of things. But
there's also what they use, what they use in order to make the rennets that they use in order to make the cheeses. So in the olden days, they used to use innards of cows to start the meat on the curdle. So you have to put some kind of agent into the milk to start it to curdle, to start that process of turning it into cheese.
And that was also used in kosher.
So it depends what it was. So certain things were used in kosher. It was a discussion what you could use. Certain things you were allowed to use in kosher food, like the inside of the stomach if it had been dried out or something. There's a discussion about that.
Okay, let's have a quick look at some of the other comments here. Kate Laura again, in the UK, it's very unlikely to get camel's milk in the system. Okay. SD Brooke, just as horse meat was found in Tesco's, has been treif meat found under kosher certifications. Yes, I think we are all we're all capable of making those mistakes. Elaine and Richard Bermans, the big question for many friends I speak to is the high cost. Whatever the explanation, it means many turn away from keeping kosher. So I think we've discussed that, but
I would say one other thing. I hear the cost thing, and I hear the issues that people have with the cost, et cetera, et cetera. I've tried to slightly explain the cost, but yes, I understand that people still feel miffed about the fact that it costs so much more.
Unbelievable.
What I would say is, sometimes it's also a question of priorities. If kosher is a priority, I know people that are making a lot less money than most of the people that are posting over here on the side, and yet they still decide to eat kosher because they've made it a priority. Money, very often, and the way we spend our money is about how we decide what we think is important and what we think is not important. And if we think something is important, we will spend money on it, even though it might not be the best use of money. And so for some people who don't really want to eat kosher or find that it's not enough, or it's not something that they're so pushed to, so they'll say, oh, come on, the price is prohibitive. My friends also say that kosher is very, very expensive, but they say, look, it's expensive, but being Jewish is expensive. I'll get rewarded in the world to come for the fact that I kept kosher, and it's an investment. I put my money into that. Jewish education is expensive, but you know what? I'm not willing to send my kid to a non-Jewish school just to save myself whatever it's going to cost me, because I want to get a Jewish education. It's just going to cost me money.
It's biblically mandated peer pressure. It doesn't get better than that. Michael Laurie, if one minimizes purchases of processed kosher products and follows a diet of fresh fruit, veg, fish, and some meat, chicken, it reduces the cost significantly. Maybe processed foods are also many processed foods are also extremely healthy with lots of additives.
I would say unhealthy, I think is probably what he meant.
I think it's probably what he meant. But yeah, look, that's a fair comment. There are ways of eating more cheaply.
Look, I think everybody who wants to read a book, there's always these books, save £1,000 over the month, save £500 a month by doing this little trick or doing that little trick. Yes, there are tricks, there are ways around, and if we were to eat more savvy, then chances are, yes, we could save ourselves money.
Let's look at Sheila's comment. What about vegan and vegetarian cheese? Did I miss that discussion, Rabbi? So again, effectively, you're saying in the Orthodox interpretation of this, vegan and vegetarian cheeses are not okay. Okay, bit disappointing. Let's have a look here. This is my sister and my brother-in-law. Do you pay more VAT on kosher items? It's Saul, by the way. No,
you don't pay VAT on food, I think. As I understand it, there's no VAT on food. Only on specialty items.
I think on hot food, I think is where most of it. But I think there is some VAT to pay on food. But whatever it is, I don't think.
Very little. I know when I look at my bill at the end of shopping, even if I spend £150, it's like £3 of VAT on there or something.
Yeah, I don't think there's any more VAT on kosher items. Okay,
Jay, that's an important question. I want to get to that question, by the way, having that.
Which one?
Is fish from a non-kosher supermarket okay? I'd like to clarify that as well.
Okay, so should we race through these? Let's try and give everybody a little bit of light here. Different authorities and religious groups have variable times to eat milk after meat. Robert waits 3 hours. Some wait 6 hours. In Holland, 1 hour. In Sweden, half an hour. Why are there more this comes down to minhag, no?
Sort of. The Gemara says that there was a time that where one of the Rabbanim said that my father used to wait 24 hours and I just don't eat meat and milk between the milk. I wait one meal. And so there was a discussion amongst what is one meal. So one opinion actually says as soon as you've benched and you've washed out your mouth, you're allowed to have milky after meat. Others say 1 hour, others say 6 hours. Those are the three opinions that are brought on the Shulchan Aruch and in the Ramah. And, in general, those are the main opinions. 3 hours, where it's come from, it's slightly unclear. But it's a question of an interpretation. In a Gemara, that's exactly how that question sort of came up.
Okay, some other questions as well. Let's have a look. On the topic of fish, some infantile fish have fins and scales. When they reach adulthood, they lose the fins. So are they kosher to eat whilst young fish?
Yes, anything that had it originally, anything that had fins and scales, even if it loses it afterwards, is kosher.
Okay, so let's answer that question that you asked just before. A lot of people, if I stop at the fish counter at Tesco's and I order a piece of salmon,
yes.
Some people are going to look at me strange. Some people will say I'm doing nothing wrong at all. Okay. Where do you stand on this?
Okay, so the halacha is as follows. You're allowed to buy fish from a non-kosher fish stand, from a non-Jewish fish stand, as long as you can see scales on it. If it has scales on it, every fish that has scales has had fins in the past. And as long as you see a fish that has skin on it, you say, can I see the fish? Yeah, it's got scales on it. No problem. That is definitely a kosher fish. You are definitely allowed to have it. There's no issue in shechting a fish, so there's no problem with that. And all you need to do is when you bring it home, you need to rub it down really well. That's fine. If you're going to ask the fishmonger to cut the fish up for you, it's good if you were to ask him, could you please wipe down your knife or maybe sharpen your knife before you do it? And this way, there's nothing left on the knife from the previous person. Worst comes to worst, even if he didn't do that, bring it home, wash it down, just rub it down with cold water. You're fine. Salmon is the one exception to the whole thing. There are almost no pink fish out there. And therefore, see, white fish that's white, there's many different fish out there. The haddock, it's white, and then the many different white fish.
What's the main distinction? What's the difference between those two other than color?
Because there's so many different fish that are white, some of them are kosher and some of them are not. If I were to find just a fillet without any skin on it, I couldn't tell by looking at that fish what fish it was. Salmon is the only pink fish. If you have a pink fish, you go around the fish supermarket, you'll see there's only one fish that's pink, and that's salmon. And therefore, salmon trout is also, trout's also kosher. So there you go. Salmon or salmon trout. Because they're both kosher, there's no question. I'm not buying anything that's not that's not kosher.
And that's why sometimes that when you go to a very from simcha, if they're having fish, they leave a little portion of the skin on the outside so you can see.
I don't know why they would do that. Once it
I've
has
seen
a
that.
hechsher, if it has a hechsher, if you know it's by the MH or by the Beth Din, they made sure when the fish came into Celia or whoever it is that made the fish, they made sure it was kosher. I don't need to check afterwards that it's kosher again.
Okay.
They don't need to convince me afterwards.
Okay.
They don't leave on the kosher certification on my chicken. Do you know what I mean? On the wings, they don't leave a little thing saying Manchester Beth Din over here.
Well, that's when I buy chicken wings, there's a little clip in some of them, and I have
exactly, but you've
that.
never seen a clip like that in Celia's food at a simcha.
No, you have to pay
Why
extra.
would they leave the skin on? I don't see that.
Okay, Ian's made a comment which is funny, but it echoes what everybody else is saying further on down. He says, I understand the concept of not drinking non-kosher wine. However, I can't understand how drinking a glass of Vimto can lead to intermarriage. Really, though, it's echoed by this. And if wine leads to intermarriage, why are beer and spirits okay?
Okay.
We have a bit of a double standard. We've
so
made wine the culprit.
So 2 questions. The first question I'll start with Esty Brooks' question, then come back to Ian's question. I think because it makes more sense. There is a double standard here when it comes to beer and spirits, and there is because there was this yain nesach, because there was already this wine was forbidden for another reason because the avodah zarah, as we mentioned before. Chazal then extended that on to intermarriage. You say, yeah, but you know what? I won't drink wine with my non-Jewish friends. I'll sit and have a beer, and I could still intermarry over beer or over vodka, over whiskey. That's probably true, but because there was never an original edict against beer, they didn't extend that one to the intermarriage as well. That's the first thing to say. The second one to be said in Ian's case is that you're right. Vimto won't cause you to Vimto won't cause you to intermarry. I don't know what goes in it. What was in it? Just grape juice. I mean, what was in it?
I think the item that they were worried about was grape juice. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the rule is that you cannot have, it's not just wine. You cannot have grape juice either. So you say, big deal. I'm not going to intermarry because of grape juice. You're right. Certain things, they have an overarching rule. And so it's the rule for wine, it's the rule for grape juice, and it's the rule for almost any grape product that comes with it that has juice in it is going to be the same. So you say, yeah, but Vimto is not really wine. That might be true, but we're not going to start splitting hairs like that. We've made an overarching rule, and that rule applies all across.
Okie doke. Right. Okay. We're just going to pick up on this one here. Abby Gasworth. It's not all about the money. A lot of bar mitzvahs are not having kosher caterers, claiming that they are too expensive, yet they will have a huge marquee in their back garden or a party in a fancy hotel in town, utilizing the hotel catering resources. Priorities. This Absolutely. Is something that we've discussed at shul. We try and make things kosher alternatives available to people more affordably. But it's difficult, isn't it? The way that people celebrate bar mitzvahs these days in general.
It is very, very difficult because I think people are throwing out a ton of money on all sorts of things, and that's coming. I thought that he was going to speak about that. Avi was going to write about about people's peer pressure. Because again, a lot of these big parties that people are making, they're making because of peer pressure. Do you really need to show everybody you can afford 50 grand and it's a one night do, it's 3, 4, 5 hours. People throw out such fortunes, silly money on these things. But I mean, the amount of money that I've seen people waste, I work here, so I know that I see the Hilton Suite sometimes, and you might have seen the way people have done it up. It is just, it's perverse. You could feed, if you're talking about bringing down the price of Kashrus and, the Bedouin should take 20, 30p off the meat. If you would take 10 grand from this stupid party and give it to a starving family, they'd have what to eat for months.
I've got a message coming through.
Complain about the 30p of the kosher meat and the Bedouin.
Message coming through from the treasurer. He says, let them have their parties as long as it's at the Hilton Suite. Who cares what they spend? Okay. Stephen Verber said VAT on food is a talk on its own.
Absolutely. I'm not in taxes, but I know Stephen is, so he knows better than I do.
At a simcha, some rabbanim will not eat the kosher food as it's deemed not kosher enough. Who has got the correct standard? This is very true, isn't it?
It is true, but I know, for example, that Rabbi Ginsburg said to me he used to, and then he was once stuck at a meal where he wasn't happy with the level of the catering, but he couldn't say so, and therefore from that day onwards, he just decided he's not. He made himself like a blanket rule: I'm only having fish at the simcha, and this way I don't have to insult this Baal Simcha or any other Baal Simcha because it just gets too complicated. And in 90% of the cases, the caterer will be okay. But it's like the same thing that I don't eat by anybody in shul. I don't eat by people in shul because if I were to say, David Mintz, you're kosher enough, and Jack Cohen, name made up, you're not kosher enough, I'm going to insult somebody. And therefore, I don't eat by David Mintz, even if David Mintz is kosher enough, because for me to say David Mintz, yes, and insults people. So it's just easier to have one overarching rule. It's not that people are saying that the food at the simcha is not kosher. But if people have been to simchas where the food is not kosher enough, they just decide, you know what? Rather than insulting one Baal Simcha, I just won't eat at any simcha, and I don't have to insult anybody.
Okay, I think we're coming close to having to let you go. I think you've got something else coming up now as well.
I need to have another share coming up.
Okay, so we're going to let you go, but in summary, just wanted to say thank you to everybody for watching. This is clearly not a straightforward subject, and a lot of people start talking about the costs a lot. It's one of those things that wind us up sometimes. It's one of the you know that we're going to get into that part of the conversation.
I think it's a good conversation to have. I think together we should work on on solving this issue. We should try to come up with a creative solution instead of moaning about it. Together, we should come up with a creative solution to see if we can bring down the prices.
So if anybody wants to learn more about specific sort of background to how these halachas were arrived at, maybe that's a subject that you can cover in some of your shiurim. Well, no evening would be complete without a message from Adam Sugar saying it's been rubbish. Rabbi, I don't know if you want to say anything to close, but the floor is yours.
I want to thank everybody for sticking with us for this long. I apologize that we were late. Please join us again next week. This has been it's been a great discussion, really. I think we should take more topics like this. I think people are really people really got into this. Lots and lots of comments. Thank you very much, David, for hosting this, and everybody for joining. Please, God, we look forward to seeing all of you again next week.
See you soon.